Good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, November 27th. I'm Sandra Smith. A Fox News alert as Bourbon Street erupts in gunfire overnight. At least one person killed in New Orleans. Nearly a dozen others injured. We'll bring you the very latest.
What would Hillary Clinton say if someone questioned the integrity of our democratic elections? No one would do that, right?
Because that's horrifying. You know, every time Donald thinks things are not going in his direction, he claims whatever it is rigged against him.
But wait, things didn't go in her direction. And now it's her campaign that is officially saying it might have been rigged. Oh my gosh.
And the president-elect gearing up for a big round of meetings tomorrow as he fills his cabinet. So who's he meeting with? And is he really considering a Democrat, possibly, for Secretary of State? Well, we will find out, and we're glad that you're here. Good morning. Mornings are better with friends.
Wow, that's a great song. I forgot that song.
Solid song.
Kind of a solid 80s.
Christmas has broken out on the plaza out there.
Feel it out there. It's a little chillier.
We're going to actually be helping you decide how to pick a Christmas tree out on the plaza. So
A real Christmas tree,
A
by the
real
way.
Christmas tree.
Cut it.
Are you guys
If it's
real or
old.
fake at home? You keep a real tree?
You gotta do the real.
Okay.
You got the smell.
Yep. I've been doing
Very
the cut it down yourself recently.
By the way, really fun to be here with you guys this
Great to
morning.
be with you. You ran a 5K
Good time.
yesterday.
Thank you, sir. Yes,
that was a
and
nice
I did get a
accomplishment.
medal.
She won.
I ran the first mile way too fast, but it was a lot of fun.
But you beat a lot of people that are younger than you and older than you and everything.
Everyone got a trophy, but your trophy was
I ran
better.
with a bunch of high school girls. And I was
Bam.
like, you guys should be faster than this. But
She owned them.
it helped me pick up my pace. But good,
Well,
good to be
congratulations.
here.
Good to
And a
see
lot
you.
going on this morning.
That's right. Jill Stein and Hillary Clinton are now demanding a recount. And Donald Trump is not afraid to tell us how he really feels about it.
That's right. He's calling the efforts in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania ridiculous and a scam.
Garrett Tenney is live in D.C. with more reaction to this. Garrett.
Hey, good morning. You know, what's interesting here is that both Green Party candidate Jill Stein and the Clinton campaign say they've looked into and investigated every report of hacking or vote tampering and found nothing. Yet they are still moving ahead with this recount effort. At first, it was only Stein, but now that Wisconsin election officials have agreed to move forward, the Clinton campaign is jumping on board as well. Last night, President-elect Trump responded to that news on Twitter, saying the Green Party scam to fill up their coffers by asking for impossible recounts is now being joined by the badly defeated and demoralized Dems. Stein has already raised more than $5 million to fund
Same freedoms there. And those are your
All right, here we go.
headlines.
I'm going down to Miami right now to get a car.
See
That's
you
pretty
later.
cool.
The deal.
15 grand off a car? I can do that.
All right.
All right, well, coming up, a security scare at Trump Tower sends cops rushing in. So what happened? We've got the details ahead.
Meanwhile, the president-elect down in Florida gearing up for a big round of meetings tomorrow back here in New York as he fills his cabinet. Who is he meeting with? Maybe Tammy Bruce? Is he really considering a Democrat for job of Secretary of State? Tammy Bruce here next to break down all the details.
President-elect Donald Trump's been busy. He's already filled some high posts in his administration, but he still has some hard choices to make for his cabinet. So who will Mr. Trump be meeting with tomorrow on Monday? And is he really considering a Democrat for Secretary of State? Here to break it all down is Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Of course, a lot of the speculation has been, who is that Secretary of State going to be? It's been really a Romney versus Giuliani, but there may be a door open for some others. But first, let's just mention who the spots that he's already filled.
Right. Obviously, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. That's clearly a reach out to the Republican establishment, but it's a good choice because he knows everyone. Steve Bannon is not somebody who has to be confirmed by the Senate. Chief strategist like a Valerie Jarrett, if you will. Jeff Sessions, Attorney General, excellent choice there. National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Obviously, everyone's been an early endorser of President-elect Trump.
Yeah.
Mike Pompeo, obviously CIA Director. People were wondering where that that would fit, but that's a clear choice. Betsy DeVos was interesting to people. That was a little bit of a surprise. At first, there was concern she was for Common Core. She's made it clear she's not. So she should be in a pretty good space. And the Nikki Haley choice, though, for UN ambassador, very interesting. She withdrew her support for Mr. Trump, has no diplomatic experience. Some people are wondering how that will work, but clearly she'll have the support.
And she was very critical of Trump during the election process.
Was.
All right, so let's move on. Secretary of State, where are we there?
Well, look, I think that the Romney situation is not going to be happening already. Kellyanne
But he's still in the mix, according to our reporting at Fox.
Kellyanne Conway has already publicly criticized the nature of the possibility of that because of loyalty.
All right, so who else is in the
Rudy
mix?
Giuliani has clearly been at the top of the list, I think. I think the concern has been his business dealings, perhaps. He would be fabulous. That's where I think
and
ultimately
who's the Democrat being considered there?
Well, we're looking at Tulsi Gabbard's names has come up in a variety of ways, which is also very interesting. She's a Democrat. She's been very critical of Barack Obama, opposed to the TPP. But again, no diplomatic experience, would add diversity to the team. But obviously, Mr. Trump wants people with experience, people who can get the job done. Rohrabacher, I think that's more of himself in a way, putting a flag up the flagpole to see if anybody salutes. But that name has come up. I don't know how seriously we should take it.
For one particular role or multiple roles, is he being
I think, well, perhaps for almost any role, but his name has come up for Secretary of State. I think they want to perhaps show.
All right, so we'll put him kind of over here. All right.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of talent, clearly. The bench is deep here.
All right, let's talk Treasury Secretary John Allison.
You know, what's interesting about him is he is a libertarian. I think he would actually be a great choice. He was against the Kelo decision, which was about property rights, when the Republicans in general have been quiet about that. He's already been involved and been very vocal against Obamacare. He's a perfect example of someone not in the system who fits what Mr. Trump already believes and what the Tea Party believes as well. Ayn Rand advocate, so he would be very interesting. Stephen Mnuchin has been mentioned as at the top of the list, but he's a big Democrat Party donor. And I think that donating to Obama, to Hillary, it would be very strange to put him in that kind of position.
And he's got the deep Goldman Sachs roots
Goldman
as well.
Sachs. So John Allison is good.
Let's talk Paul Atkins for Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve. This is another one he's going to be meeting with tomorrow. Yeah,
he's already been advising. He's been involved in the transition team. He's been advising the president-elect. This is a man that you'll see perhaps at the SEC or in a vice chair kind of position at the Fed. So that's a name you can watch for, but not necessarily at a cabinet level.
And how about the former presidential candidate himself, Rick Perry?
Look, Rick Perry's an interesting man. One of the only two people who ran in the Republican primary who had military experience, he and Lindsey Graham. I'd say defense secretary or even chair of the secretary of the Veterans Administration would be a very good position for him as well.
Okay, so let's finish up here with David Clark. Sheriff David Clark, he's going to be meeting with him tomorrow.
Right. Look, David Clark's been mentioned for Department of Homeland Security. And I think, though, that when you're looking at people who this is the kind of department that needs national experience. Everybody's a big fan of Sheriff Clark, but I think that we're looking at a very likely position for him, probably not a cabinet
level. We have to wrap
though.
it up there, and you've got Sarah Palin up here because you think she'd be good for energy
She
secretary.
is not really being mentioned a great deal these days, but Sarah Palin, energy secretary, watch out for that.
All right, Tammy Bruce, good stuff. He's going to be meeting with a lot of people tomorrow. That's a busy day. All right, should the U.S. send a representative like President Obama to Fidel Castro's funeral? The heated debate on that is next. And desperate times call for desperate measures this morning. Nancy Pelosi calling for backup.
Good morning again. We're back with some headlines. A security scare at Trump Tower. Authorities arresting a man in the lobby of New York's Trump Tower after claiming the president-elect called him, asking to speak to him immediately. Police say the man was emotionally disturbed and did not pose a threat. He's undergoing an evaluation now. And someone is wrapping up Thanksgiving weekend with 421 million reasons to be thankful. A winning Powerball ticket was sold in Tennessee with a jackpot of over $400 million. Chances of winning that were only 1 in 290 million. So far, no one has stepped forward to claim the prize, although we'll see which hosts show up for Fox & Friends tomorrow. Maybe one of them won. Pete?
Thanks, Ed. A Fox News alert. Some Republicans are urging President Obama to skip the funeral of longtime Cuban dictator Fidel Castro 1 week from today. So should any U.S. representative attend the funeral? Joining us now for a fair and balanced debate is Helen Aguirre-Ferrer, the Director of Hispanic Outreach at the RNC, and Cristina Arriaga, the Executive Director of the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty. She's also a former assistant to U.S. Ambassador Jose Sorzano at the Cuban American National Foundation. Helen and Cristina, thank you for joining us. So, Helen, I'll start with you. Should President Obama send someone, and if so, who?
Well, I'll tell you, and thank you for the invitation this morning. I don't think that Fidel Castro is worthy at all of anyone coming officially from the Cuban government. And it's not like we're doing business with the Cuban people. Sure. We're doing business with the Cuban military, who is in charge of and in control of all of the economic mechanisms and of property in Cuba. So we really need to send a message that change has to come.
Sure. And Donald Trump tweeted immediately, Fidel Castro is dead, a very different tone. He also said the deal we cut with them under Barack Obama was a bad one. What would you say, Christine, is the first step President-elect Trump should take to push Cuba in the right direction?
Look, Fidel Castro is dead, but the Castro regime is not. As his body was being prepared to be cremated, dissidents were getting arrested. Human rights activists were being sent to prison. President-elect Trump has to demand that there are free elections in Cuba for the first time in 55 years. He has to demand that the Castro brothers return to the Cuban people the $800 million that they have stolen. And he has to demand that there be freedom of speech, freedom of press. In the last 3 years alone, over 300 houses of worship have been destroyed in Cuba. Terror lives in Cuba, and terror has to be gone in order for the Cuban people to be free.
No, well said by both you, Helen and Cristina. A dictator may be dead, but that doesn't mean authoritarianism is dead on that island. And I have to give Cristina, you the prize for the most unique suggestion with the Surgeon General. We'll see if they take that up. Thank you both this morning. Appreciate it. All right, Hillary Clinton's campaign now officially making it official. They think the election day may have been rigged. What difference does it make? Our political panel, you see them right there, here to tell us next. And imagine getting a call from the president-elect Donald Trump asking you to serve at one of the highest roles in his administration. Wait until you hear who just said no.
Wait, that's not okay. He said he was having a green party out there. So.
That looks beautiful.
We're going to show you later on the show how to pick out the perfect Christmas tree and the perfect weatherman.
And Rick right now is going to start showing us how to trim a tree. Good to see you, Rick.
Good morning, guys. So I have been assured by these guys at Tyler Trees that you can buy your Christmas tree now and put it up and it will still be green and fresh at Christmas, which seems like a very long time to me, but they promise. We're going to learn how today from the guys at Tyler Trees. Take a look at the weather maps. Do want to tell you what's going on. Out across the west, we have this big storm that's moving on. It's brought a lot of rain and a lot of mountain snow, and that is nothing but good news across the west because we desperately need the moisture. And we're at the beginning of rainy season, so when it's rainy season, you want to get all the moisture that you can. Tomorrow, that storm, however, and it says Thursday up there, I apologize, it should say tomorrow, Monday, severe weather across the south, and where you see that little bit of an orange bullseye, I think we could see some tornadoes, maybe even a large tornado tomorrow. So if you are across parts of far eastern Texas and northern Louisiana, you need to be prepared that tomorrow a threat for some severe weather. That same storm brings some really beneficial rain. We have this incredible drought going on across the southeast, and it has brought all of the wildfires that we've been dealing with. If you're across parts of the Carolinas and Georgia, you have you know what I'm talking about with the drought and the fires. We'll take a look at what happens over the next couple of days. The rain moves in, and it is the first significant rain that we've had in about 5 months. Some spots will likely see 5 to 7 inches of rain, and that is nothing but good news. All right, guys, send it back to you inside.
All right, Rick, thank you. We'll see you in a bit. Turning now to your headlines. On this Sunday morning, a suspect in custody this morning after a series of attacks on Starbucks coffee shops.
Last wearing door clothing, I walked into Starbucks on Lemons, put a device on the counter and took off.
The FBI says someone planted suspicious devices into 3 closed Starbucks locations in Albuquerque, New Mexico. One of them exploded, causing some damage, but no one was hurt. No word on a motive. All right, desperate times call for desperate measures. That's why Nancy Pelosi is calling for backup as she tries to hold on to her House Democratic leadership. 50 of the 65 women who will vote in Wednesday's election pledging their support to the California Congresswoman. She needs a minimum of 100 votes to hold off Ohio's Tim Ryan for the minority position. Pelosi has led the House Democrats since 2003. An offer he can refuse. Jerry Falwell Jr. says President-elect Donald Trump offered him a spot in his cabinet, but he turned it down. The president of Liberty University says Mr. Trump offered him the role of Secretary of Education, but wanted a 4 to 6 year commitment. Falwell says he turned it down for personal reasons, saying he couldn't leave the university for more than 2 years. And those are your headlines. Ed standing by with our panel.
All right, it was barely a month ago when Hillary Clinton made it quite clear how she felt about election results and a possible challenge from Donald Trump.
He said something truly horrifying. He became the first person running for president, Republican or Democrat, who refused to say that he would respect the results of this election. Now, that is a direct threat to our democracy.
Oh, so quaint. That was then. This is now. It's all changed, of course, because she lost. Hillary Clinton wants in on the recount effort launched by Green Party nominee Jill Stein. Here to react, our power panel, Andrew Wilkow, host of the Wilkow Majority, right next door at SiriusXM, Democratic Ohio State Senator Capri Cafaro, and Democratic strategist, a Trumpocrat.
Yes.
A Trump Democrat,
Yes.
Harlan Hill. Good morning. Harlan, what in the world is going on? Hillary Clinton told me. She told me this was a threat to democracy if you didn't accept the results.
Right. I mean, I guess she said that she would only accept the results if she won, right? And you know, when it's clear that she hadn't, she's willing to use Jill Stein as her goat to actually achieve this, because she's not willing to actually stand up and say that she wants a recount. And we know that John Podesta and Donna Brazile have been briefed on this, and that they've been behind this push for Jill Stein to challenge the results.
Capri, you're a Democratic state senator in the great state of Ohio. You guys need a wambulance or what? What's going on here?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, honestly, I am a little bit beside myself at this point. I mean, Jill Stein has raised a bunch of money, $7 million at this point, for the recount effort in Wisconsin in particular. Wisconsin only has 10 electoral votes. So this is not going to get...
And Donald Trump's over 300 electoral votes.
Like
it's not going to get Hillary Clinton.
Not going to get her.
These are big questions going forward. Trump did not get a gift here. I think the rally has been a part of what he's been saying, but again, it's going to come down to what he actually does.
What about the fact that interest rates are starting to tick up? And we're hearing about, oil prices go up when the economy starts to hum a bit more, and then that means more, you're going to pay more at the pump.
Yes, well, savers are going to like interest rates going up a little bit because they haven't been able to get anything. Banks are going to like that. Oil prices, don't look for oil prices to rise all that much. Sure. We've got a lot of supply out there. OPEC's trying to reach an agreement. I don't think it's going to be a strong agreement.
You know what else has strengthened in the wake of the Donald Trump victory is the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at over decade highs.
Yeah.
Obviously, tie that in with
What's the biggest driver of that?
Well, tough for exports. We're expecting a couple things. Questions about trade. What are the trade policies going to be like in the United States? Interest rates going up actually drives the dollar up as well. It's tough for exporters. What's interesting is that smaller businesses have really fared well in the market over the past couple weeks. So businesses that are less exposed to international sales.
Thanks for coming in.
You bet. Great
I'm
to be here.
professor at King's College and, like me, former resident of Forest Lake, Minnesota.
Absolutely.
Long time, buddy.
Proudly.
That's right.
Wow.
All right. Hey, Mitt Romney, tell us what you really think of Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. He gets a free ride to the White House, and all we get is a lousy hat.
Now, that was March.
Secretary of State?
This year. But is he really finally ready to apologize to the president-elect? Someone who worked closely with Governor Romney on his presidential campaign, here with some inside information next.
Swing, swing from the table side, my heart is crushed.
Good morning. It is Sunday, November 27th. I'm Sandra Smith, and this is a Fox News alert. While you were sleeping, at least one person is dead, nearly a dozen more injured in the city of...
The mainstream media was, of course, that Donald Trump was going to lose and that he was going to be a crybaby, and his supporters were going to say everything was rigged. And now the shoe's on the other foot. I mean, look what Hillary Clinton said after Chris Wallace asked Donald Trump about it in that last debate.
That's horrifying. Every time Donald thinks things are not going in his direction, he claims whatever it is rigged against him. That is not the way our democracy works.
You know, a big part. She can't.
Now
even
she's
fake-
gonna tell us how it
Horrifying.
works.
Now she's going to tell us. But even her own legal counsel acknowledges that there's no evidence of hacking in these 3 states or elsewhere, and that the margins that Trump won by in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania exceeds the largest margin ever overturned in a recount. So
Quick
it's
fact,
not going to
Wisconsin,
happen.
it was closer in Wisconsin in 2000 and 2004, and yet there were no recounts because the losers in those cases didn't demand anything. They said it was fair and square.
What if maybe she's doing it not to actually overturn it, but just to promote herself in the Green Party, and it's a
Jill
one-time
Stein,
scam?
switching from
Jill
Hillary.
Stein, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and Jill Stein, it's interesting. Maybe she's trying to throw us off the idea that there's some kind of either coordination or at least financial backing from Hillary supporters, because Jill Stein is on Twitter attacking Hillary Clinton as if they're not in the same boat, but they are both now pushing for this recount.
Yeah, Donald Trump tweeting about it as well, saying this is a scam. But something else that we're talking about this morning, obviously, is still the passing of Fidel Castro. And some news here, Canada's golden boy, Justin Trudeau, gets blasted for praising Fidel Castro as a remarkable leader.
Can you believe what he said? He said, "It is with deep sorrow that I learned today of the death of Cuba's longest-serving president, a legendary revolutionary and orator as well. Mr. Castro made significant improvements to the education and health care of his island nation." Quick aside, the people on his island nation were suffering all along. On behalf of all Canadians, he says, Sophie and I offer our deepest do it on bended knee.
You know, Ed, I don't know about that. Look, I think that there are apologies and there are apologies. I can see that, obviously, if the president-elect makes a decision to appoint Governor Romney, that there are ample opportunities for the person to show their interest, which I think Governor Romney has done. But more importantly, we have not seen this before, right? We've seen this in politics on both sides.
Sure.
Go back to recent history, to the Jack Kennedy-LBJ relationship. Look at George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, the voodoo economics comments, and Reagan suddenly made Bush his vice president. This goes on and on and on. The rhetoric of the campaign is different than the practicality of governing, and I think what this shows more than anything is at least the president-elect has been very serious and thoughtful about this, and he's willing to sort of reach out, which I think is reflected in some of the appointments he's made so far. I'm not sure you get an apology out of Mitt Romney. I think what you get is, I want to serve, and I've indicated that, and if I'm the right guy, then I'll do it.
But, Patrick, I want to press you on that because my understanding is there are a lot of Romney loyalists like yourself who don't believe he should apologize. But a moment ago you said there are apologies and then there are apologies. Right. I'm wondering, I'm reading, tell me if I'm wrong, that maybe there's a way if, and I underline if, Mitt Romney were tapped to be Secretary of State where he could express regret or something short of a full apology to say maybe I shouldn't have said it that way before.
Sure. Look, if Governor Romney is in fact picked by the president-elect, I think that there will be ample opportunities, Ed, because people like you and the rest of the press are going to want exactly that. So the question is, how far does he go with this? I'm sure this is something that was discussed at that meeting in New Jersey last week. I'm not sure it's a full-out apology. I think it's more during the fog of war and the tough rhetoric of a campaign, things can be said, etc.
Right.
I think it's very, very important that Governor Romney make it clear. He wants to serve this administration, and I believe he's more than capable of doing that. Apparently, the president-elect, at least in terms of consideration, does as well.
Quickly, I want to get to the fact that people very senior in the Trump camp, though, seem skeptical of Governor Romney. Kellyanne Conway taking time out from Thanksgiving to say, receiving deluge of social media and private communications already Romney. Some Trump loyalists warn against Romney as Secretary of State. She added Kissinger and Schultz as secretaries, flew around the world less, consulted the president close to home, and were loyal. Good checklist. Emphasis there, Patrick, on the word loyal. If he's picked, is this going to be something hanging over Romney's head?
I'm not sure. Look, I think the most important thing that can happen here, after campaigns, and I don't care whether they're presidential campaigns that I've been involved with, Senate races, governor's races, I find that candidates tend to forget things faster than staffs. It's not uncommon that the person who's burdened with the idea of governing has to make the kind of choice to assemble a government that will make his administration, her administration, work best. Sometimes that's hard for staff to get over. I have great respect for Kellyanne Conway. I think she's an incredibly smart person. But there's a little hurt and anger here, which is understandable. At the end of the day, though, at the end of the day, Donald Trump has shown, as president-elect, that he is in the mood now to govern, that the campaign is over, and the very fact that he's considering Mitt Romney, I think, is a very encouraging sign
Patrick
for all
Griffin,
parts of the GOP.
I think you're onto something there, that maybe there's something about regret during the fog of war, and then maybe he hopes he gets the job. We appreciate your insight this morning, Patrick Griffin.
Thanks, Ed.
Meanwhile, losing a loved one is obviously hard, especially when it's a socialist dictator who oppressed his people and let children starve. Just ask the mainstream media.
Fidel Castro was considered, even to this day, the George Washington of his country. A romantic figure when he came into power.
One journalist, fed up with her colleagues, is here to tell the truth next.
We are back with some quick headlines. Google adding a new tool to the fight against ISIS. The tech company unveiling something called Redirect, which they hope will help slow down online recruitment. They're using targeted ads to redirect people who search keywords related to joining ISIS, and instead of bringing them to content, it brings them to content that would deter them from joining, as opposed to getting information. And hackers hit public transit, and now all rides are free. The ticketing machines at San Francisco train stations are now out of order, and the SFMTA's system isn't reading payment cards. The rail service is keeping the fare gates open as they work to fix the problem. Like the welfare state there, lots of free rides today in San Francisco. Sandra, over to you.
All right, thanks, Pete. Well, in the hours following Fidel Castro's death, many in the media were praising the Cuban dictator.
Fidel Castro was considered, even to this day, the George Washington of his country, among those who remain in Cuba. He was also a very divisive figure.
You see the medicine system they are very proud of. You see athletes, and think of how many Cuban athletes have enriched the sports in this country and around the world.
He was a romantic figure when he came into power, and when he knocked off a corrupt dictator, Batista, we American young high school kids and kids in those days rooted like mad for the guy.
Is this a fair reaction for a harsh dictator like Castro? Joining me now to weigh in is veteran Spanish language journalist and Mega TV host Elvira Salazar. Good of you to be here this morning. What did you make of what you just heard from those journalists?
Well, good morning. I think that anybody that acclaims or praises the Cuban Revolution or Fidel Castro the way I am hearing my colleagues doing it have never lived in Cuba for more than a week. Absolutely, that Cuba and the Castro brothers offered the Cubans good health, good social services, good education, and absolutely wonderful athletics.
So why do you think there is such a difference from the way, say, we just heard from Chris Matthews, Brian Williams, talking about this romantic version of Cuba? Your parents fled Cuba. Why is there such a difference in the way they see it and the way you and the people of Cuba see it?
Because we have lived it. Because we know in reality what really happened. And what happened is that the Castro brothers offered the Cuban people a very perverse social contract, which meant I'm going to give you health and education and athletics, but you have to give me in exchange your life, your minds, and your freedom. That's a very perverse social contract, and that's a very high price to pay in order to get health and education. Why don't we go to let's go to Costa Rica. That's a much better example, where they offered health and education, but they didn't take away any of the social liberties.
And so you say that you say Cubans would escape that social contract to which you referred. When they could, they did.
Oh my God, they have escaped it for 56 years. 20% of the Cuban population has fled. You still have rafters trying to defy the sharks to come to the Florida coast. You have people the Cuban people try to flee as much as they can, unfortunately, because it's a torment to live on the Cuban island. But that's what, unfortunately, many of my colleagues do not realize and they do not see.
Have you spoken with any of them in the wake of Fidel Castro's death? When you hear those responses, and it's not just your journalist colleagues that are saying things like this, it is world leaders, including President Barack Obama, who has put out reactions to his death that also sounds like a romantic version of Fidel Castro in Cuba.
Absolutely, and I have spoken with many of them, but unfortunately they only want to look at the merits, but they do not want to see the miseries. There are
56 years of suffering, and you have been watching and you have been interviewing many of the victims. But when you talk to the Cuban people, even the people that are still living on the island and the people that have fled, it's very clear to all of us that it was one of the cruelest and most evil revolutions that the America has ever seen. That if you're going to talk about the acclaim, you're going to talk about the good things, you also have to talk about the miseries. You have to say that Cuba right now has the highest suicide rate in the Americas per capita. You also have to say that right now, like I said, there are thousands of rafters or people trying to escape and they can't. You also have to say that homosexuals, gay and lesbians were put in concentration camps called the UMAPs to change their sexual preferences. You have to say that the Castro brothers shut down Catholic churches and Jewish synagogues and kicked out the rabbis and the priests. So there's a long list. It's true that they gave wonderful health and education and athletics, but you also have to say the cost they paid, and we're still paying the Cuban people. But now it's a new dawn.
And with
so let's put
Raul
all
in
that
power,
aside.
what do you see
It's
as
a
the
new
future
dawn.
for Cuba?
And that is what we're betting on. And like I said, you know, we're talking about the miseries, but let's talk about the future and the positive. Right now, there's a new dawn, there's a new era that could open for Cuba. And it depends on Raul Castro and the military elite that surrounds him.
And
they should take up
based on what we just heard from your colleagues in the media, saying that he's the George Washington of his country among those remain in Cuba. Will you see any change in the media and the way they see Cuba and Raul running that country?
But, you know, George Washington was the founding father of the most extraordinary country in the world that is the beacon of human rights. Everybody wants to come to the United States because here you can live your American dream. So I don't think that there's any comparison. Is the opposite. George Washington and Fidel Castro. It's just that people buy the marketing. The Cuban Revolution and Fidel Castro was an expert at the marketing, and they won the war of the ideas, but not the war that but not the reality that Cubans needed to live. But like I said, it's a new dawn. We're happy. I think it's a new era, and it depends on Raul whether he's going to take up what President Obama has offered him, which has been wonderful economic reforms and.
Certainly good to get your thoughts and perspective on that this morning, Elvira Salazar. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
All right, well, Hillary Clinton's campaign now making it official. They think the election may have been rigged. What difference does it make? Chris Wallace here to tell us. And we have our first reaction from the president-elect. That's next. Plus, does President Obama already have a new job lined up in Washington?
Well, it's an honor again to bring in Chris Wallace, the
Yes,
anchor and host, of course, of Fox News Sunday, because once again, he's the man of the hour. That third presidential debate, Chris, it just keeps living on, because remember when you, of course, asked that question of Donald Trump about whether or not he would eventually concede if he lost the election, now it seems like the shoe's on the other foot for Hillary Clinton.
Well, it's quite astonishing, because you got to remember at that point he was kind of waffling on that issue as to whether or not he would accept the results of the election. And then Mike Pence and his own daughter Ivanka Trump both said, of course he would. And I asked him the question at the election because he hadn't said it, and he said, I'll keep you in suspense, famously. And Hillary Clinton attacked him and said, well, that's just horrifying. That isn't the way our democracy works. And now here we are with how many days, I'm sure you figured it out, since the election, but almost close to a month. And her campaign, her top campaign lawyer says they will join and participate in the Jill Stein-initiated recount in Wisconsin, and if they can make it happen also in Michigan and Pennsylvania. So, yeah, the shoe is on the other foot indeed.
Absolutely. Well, just 15 minutes ago, the new president-elect tweeted a response to this. He said, and I quote, Hillary Clinton conceded the election when she called me just prior to the victory speech, and after the results were in, nothing will change. A lot of speculation about why Jill Stein is doing this. Does she think she can change something for real? Is she raising money for the Green Party? What is she doing?
I think she's trying to raise money for herself and keep, you know, here's the thing. In the state of Wisconsin, it looks like she will be the difference between Hillary Clinton winning and losing, that Trump's vote margin is less than the number of votes that Jill Stein got. So on the one hand, she keeps Hillary Clinton from winning Wisconsin, and now she wants to raise money and push her own profile. And she has raised a lot of money, north of $5 million, apparently going to $7 million for this effort. So, I mean, it is kind of a study in hypocrisy on her part. If she cared all that much about Hillary Clinton winning, maybe she shouldn't have run in the first place. But it's very interesting that the Clinton camp would decide to join in this. Now, they say, well, we're just on the sidelines. We want to make sure the recount is accurate. But it is odd, and as I say, completely contradictory from what she said in that third debate. And there's no indication whatsoever that a recount is going to change this. Recounts make a difference when you're talking about 1,000 votes. But, we're talking here in the case of Pennsylvania about, I think it's 70,000 votes. Right. And in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin, north of 20,000. So I don't see how this changes the election results at all.
All right, and Chris, tomorrow's going to be a busy day for the president-elect. He's going to be meeting with more potential picks during the Trump transition. Some new names have been added to the list of contenders for Secretary of State. For so long, this has been Mitt Romney, Rudy Giuliani, but now are there some third options being discussed?
Well, that's right. And some of them are generals. You see them up there, David Petraeus, John Kelly. I have to say that he needs to settle this because this has become kind of ugly. I mean, when you have Kellyanne Conway, who was his campaign manager, is a Trump transition advisor, and she is tweeting out criticism of Mitt Romney, or saying, not her direct criticism, but saying, I'm being deluged with people who are upset about the choice of Romney. I mean, this needs to be settled. He needs to decide who it is. And move on. Particularly when you're talking about the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, you would think he would want to lock those up sooner rather than later. Yeah. Chris, and in terms of the generals, let me just say, it is, some would argue, a little bit troubling, the possibility that you could have the National Security Advisor, who's already been named Mike Flynn, the Defense Secretary, and at this point we think General James Mad Dog Mattis is the leading contender, and either Petraeus or somebody else, former general for Secretary of State, to have three retired generals as all three national security slots would be a little curious.
Yeah, and Chris, we only have about 30 seconds, but you've got Reince Priebus, obviously the incoming White House Chief of Staff today, and one of the questions out there, of course, is will Mitt Romney have to apologize or do something? A lot of conservatives not happy that he may be the Secretary of State.
Have you been looking at my questions?
No!
But obviously, that is one of the key questions. We also want to ask him because nobody from the Trump transition has gone on the record on camera and talked about this whole question of what they're going to do with Cuba. Trump, during the campaign, talked about trying to roll back the new relations that Obama set. We'll see whether they're going to follow through on that.
All right.
Have a good show, Chris.
We will be watching. Chris Wallace, Fox News Sunday. Thank you.
All right. He's also got Tim Ryan, who's challenging Nancy Pelosi for speakership on the Democrat side. So a lot of news on Fox News Sunday.
All righty. Turning to your headlines on this Sunday morning, a suspect in custody after a series of attacks on Starbucks coffee shops.
Good afternoon, door closing. I walked into Starbucks on Lomas, put a device on the counter and took off.
The FBI says someone planted suspicious devices into 3 closed Starbucks locations in Albuquerque, New Mexico. One of them exploded, causing some damage, but no one was hurt, thankfully. No word on a motive. A disgusting attack on our Border Patrol agents has officials on edge. Mexicans assaulting agents with rocks multiple times on the Rio Grande River near the southern Texas border. No one was hurt and the agents didn't fight back, but their boat was damaged. Just a day later, a Border Patrol agent and Texas officer were both shot about an hour away. Both will be okay. Do you want the government looking at your web history? What would they find there? Well, it's about to become the law in Britain. The UK Parliament passing a controversial bill giving authorities from police, food regulators, and even tax inspectors the power to look at internet browsing records. Telecom companies required to keep records of all users' web activity for a year, creating databases of personal information. Firms and critics worry it will be vulnerable to hackers, as everything is on the web. Well, from Commander-in-Chief to Speaker of the House, a new Change.org petition urging President Obama to run for Congress in 2018. Activists think it'll help rally discouraged Democrats, flip districts, and gain back control of the House. However, current Illinois Representative Bobby Rush would have to step aside for the president to run, something the 70-year-old has made no indication of doing. Maybe a job for President Obama in the future. Those are your headlines.
That has happened. You know, a future president did run for Congress. I don't know who, so maybe that's a trivia for folks watching out there. I can't remember who
Was it Taft who went on the court after?
Yeah,
Anyway, we'll figure that out.
And isn't Chelsea Clinton running for Congress too? So maybe we'll get the Clintons and the
That's what they
Obamas all running for Congress. All right. Well, you just heard Chris's take on the election recount. Newt Gingrich joins us live with his reaction at the top of the hour.
And Pope Francis feels what he called grief and sorrow for atheist dictator Fidel Castro. Does this mean exiled Cuban Americans are sinners for celebrating? Father Jonathan is here to discuss.
Welcome back. The death of excommunicated atheist dictator Fidel Castro still grieved by Pope Francis. In a message to Raul Castro, the Pope wrote, quote, "I express my sentiments of sorrow to your excellency and other family members of the deceased dignitary, as well as to the people of this beloved nation."
So what does this say about exiled Cuban Americans here as they celebrate in the streets of Miami?
Here to weigh in is Fox News religion contributor Father Jonathan Morris.
Good morning.
Father, always good to see you.
Yeah.
Good morning.
You know, if they say that there are two things we know for sure are always going to happen, death and taxes. Well, here's another one. Popes, the Vatican, are never going to rejoice publicly when somebody dies.
Sure.
In fact, they're going to mourn and grieve for their soul. And especially there should be grieving for the soul of an publicly unrepented dictator. Okay, now I don't know what his personal life was like, but the Vatican's never going to be saying, yippee, someone has died. At the same time, it's not only understandable, but I think a very healthy and normal thing for people to be celebrating in the streets, hopefully the beginning of an end of a terrible, terrible era for the Cuban people.
Well, there are a lot of Catholics and people of all kinds of faith, obviously, in Florida, particularly in Miami, Cuban exiles, as we mentioned, who have been dancing in the streets, and they feel they still have relatives back there in Cuba who have been oppressed. They're on food lines, literally having their food rationed, while this dictator had multiple luxury vacation properties and all kinds of money and riches. So how do they reconcile all
It's true, and for many, many years, the Vatican, we go back to John Paul II, Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, have spoken out very strongly against human rights abuses in Cuba. At the same time, they have taken this side, the diplomatic angle, and they've worked, we know very publicly recently, with the Obama administration in order to regularize relationships between the United States and Cuba. So that's probably another element. Listen, we're not going to publicly go and rail against Fidel Castro as he's dying. So maybe that's, whether that works or not, that's a prudential decision.
60 years of atheist authoritarian regime in Cuba. What?
Rigged.
Of course. And it remains one of the president-elect's top priorities, keeping Carrier air conditioner here in the U.S.
Within 24 hours, they will call and say, "Sir, we've decided to stay in the United States. We'll stay in Indiana." Or they'll go someplace else, but they're staying in the United States.
But not if Uncle Bernie has anything to do with it. The socialist senator says he has a better plan, and he's about to save the day.
Whoa.
I'm going to sip my coffee while Bernie saves the day. Mornings are better with Bernie. Not really, but they're better with friends.
Wow.
All right, we've got a lot of news this morning. We've been having a little fun with the Christmas season in the air. But we also have the pleasure, the honor to welcome in former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, interrupting his vacation down in Naples, Florida, briefly. And we thank you for doing that, but we mostly thank your wife. You've got a new book out, Treason, a novel about terrorism, a more dark subject. But your wife, of course, has a more lovely subject. It's called Hail to the Chief, in which she has Ellis the elephant teach young children all about American presidents. And we obviously have a new president about to take power. But I wanted to first talk to you about Fidel Castro passing on. And we've seen people in the mainstream media, like Chris Matthews, saying he was really a romantic figure, Mr. Speaker.
Well, you know, this is a good place to test the insanity of the American left. He wasn't a romantic figure if you were being shot by him. He wasn't a romantic figure if you were being driven off the island, as hundreds of thousands were, because he stole their property and threatened to put them in prison. You weren't a romantic figure if you were, he wasn't a romantic figure if you were a poet who spent 16 years in a prison because Fidel didn't like you. Let's be clear. The average car in Cuba is over 30 years old. It would take the average Cuban who earns $50 a month 100 years to buy the least expensive new car currently available in Cuba. Now, this is all a result of socialism gone amok. Bernie Sanders' exact fantasy come to life in Cuba. It doesn't work. And I think people ought to be honest about this. And any professor or any writer who says they like Fidel ought to go volunteer to spend 6 months in a Cuban jail. And then tell us how they feel about this dictatorship.
Absolutely. In contrast to the United States, and even many years ago, Ronald Reagan, when he was president, obviously Fidel Castro railed against him. The New York Times highlighted that, as it oftentimes does, finds a way to hold up Castro but criticize Ronald Reagan. This is what Castro said in 1985. He said, if his power, meaning Ronald Reagan's, includes something as monstrously undemocratic as the ability to order a thermonuclear war, I ask you, who then is more of a dictator? The President of the United States or I? We know how he feels about America. We've got a new president coming in. What can Donald Trump do to set the stage for turning the page on these horrific Castros?
Well, I think he can aggressively implement the Helms-Burton Act, which we passed in 1996 when I was Speaker. I think he can maximize information flowing into the island in a variety of ways, by radio, by internet, by Facebook. I think he can also maximize the pressure on the new government and say, look, we're very clear about this. We need free elections. We need the rule of law. We need a belief that the Cuban people, not the Cuban dictators, have a future. And then Raul Castro, who has said he'll stay in office till 2018, who's already designated his replacement, the current vice president, they get to make a choice. But I don't think we should have this Obama model, which has, by the way, helped nobody but the dictatorship. I think that what we have to have is a toughness mentally about taking on the Cuban dictatorship.
So, Speaker, should the White House send a representative of this country to Castro's funeral?
I can't imagine anybody they would send unless Marco Rubio would agree to go. I think to send a Cuban American who stands totally for freedom to be in Cuba might be worth at least exploring. But to send the Vice President or the President or the Secretary of State, I think would be a terrible insult to the millions of Cubans who are still suffering at the hands of a vicious dictatorship.
Mr. Speaker, let's move on to the Trump transition and something you're intimately familiar with. And there is a lot of consternation, as you know, among some of your fellow conservatives that Mitt Romney appears to be, not just appears to be, but is a serious candidate to be Secretary of State. And our reporting tells us, Fox First reported a couple of days ago, that there are conversations going on in private about whether Mitt Romney might apologize to Donald Trump in some public way for basically flat out calling him a phony and a fraud. Do you think an apology is necessary here?
Well, let me first of all say I will support whoever President-elect Trump picks because he has the right to fill the cabinet based on his judgment and on his vision of going forward. So while I have very strong opinions, and I'm going to say them, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't support whoever President-elect Trump picked. I think there is nothing Mitt Romney can say that doesn't sound phony and, frankly, pathetic. He made his case. He made his case all year. He did all he could to help cause Trump to lose Utah. He called Trump vicious and vile things. He described him in language that is not possibly compatible with being together. And the idea that now that Trump has won, that Mitt would suddenly decide to issue a mea culpa and say, oh, gee, all the vicious things I said about you when you were running, I didn't really mean. Well, he sure did mean them, and he sure did try to defeat Donald Trump. And I think speaking for most of the Trump supporters, while we will support President-elect Trump in whatever he does, I think we would be enormously disappointed if he brought Mitt Romney in any position of authority.
Mr. Speaker, the President-elect has run a transparent transition process, knowing who he's meeting with and what positions he may be considering them for. But this standoff a bit or pause between Giuliani and Romney has opened the door for some potential other candidates. I think we'll be able to put them up on the screen. You've got Tulsi Gabbard mentioned, Bob Corker, David Petraeus, and John Kelly, two generals. Do you see anyone else emerging, or do you think this really is a Romney-Giuliani matchup at this point?
Look, I also think Ambassador Bolton has a tremendous potential. Sure. But candidly, I mean, if for whatever it's worth, in my opinion, Rudy Giuliani would be a great Secretary of State. This whole socialist baloney that the news media brings up, that he has too many contacts overseas. John Foster Dulles was the greatest international lawyer in the world when President Eisenhower picked him to be Secretary of State. They actually thought that was an advantage. Rudy has been in 80 countries. Rudy has connections all around the planet. It's an advantage to America to have somebody who's done something. I think this left-wing vision that if only you sat at Harvard, got tenure, and did nothing in the real world, you'd be the perfect candidate, is exactly what's wrong with Washington. And I think Rudy Giuliani will do as much to clean up the State Department. I can't imagine anybody who would be a tougher leader or a tougher advocate for America than Rudy Giuliani.
All right, and Speaker, something else that continues to be big news this morning is that Team Hillary, with the leadership of Jill Stein, is challenging the election results. Trump has taken to Twitter to slam this effort as a scam. But Hillary Clinton, she was horrified when Donald Trump, during the election process, even hinted that he might challenge an election if he thought it was rigged. And here she is doing it.
Look, if you were Secretary Clinton and you had spent 42 years of your life from the time you were a student when you worked for Joe Lieberman for State Senate, not U.S. Senate, 42 years, and you twice had thought you were going to be president, and you have to face Bill Clinton, who actually won, and you're going to have to think through, how do I explain that I'm a loser? You'll grasp at any straw. There's no straw too tiny for Hillary Clinton to grasp it, and it's sad. But we're watching her live out a psychodrama in public, but the fact is she lost. She lost decisively. She lost according to the rules of the game. And at some point, she will gradually disappear to write her memoirs or do something else.
Go ahead. Is this just an extension to discredit? You saw it with the protests afterwards. You see it now with these challenges. Where will this go next? Are they ever going to accept that President-elect Trump will be President Trump?
If President Trump governs as firmly and as courageously as he campaigned, if he does genuinely take steps to clean out the swamp, if he is prepared to take on, for example, the corrupt parts of the bureaucracy and insist on real civil service reform, if he is prepared to take on the Veterans Administration, something one of your hosts knows an immense amount about, he's going to have left-wingers mad at him every morning. This is just a fact. I mean, the New York Times will every day be apoplectic that we have Donald J. Trump in the White House because the New York Times was so desperate to have anybody else. And I think that means that the left will be in turmoil for the next 8 years. And, you know, candidly, as an observer of the American scene, I'm pretty happy when the left is in turmoil. I worry when they're happy.
But Speaker, you know they're using this this transition team effort as an excuse to say that the Trump transition is in turmoil because you do have Kellyanne Conway, you know, speaking out against having Mitt Romney be chosen as Speaker of the House, or Secretary of State.
No, I was Speaker of the House.
Thank you, sir. Are they divided though? Can you clear that up?
Now, look, well, I mean, first of all, this is a case where the president-elect clearly has allowed this to occur. I mean, he could have cut it off at any point. He could have said no to Romney. He could have said yes to Giuliani. He could have said yes to Romney. And if he'd said yes to Romney, I would be supporting Romney today. So obviously, he wants to see where his base is. He's being, you know, it's interesting. He's being patient. He's being deliberate. He went to Mar-a-Lago to take a deep breath and slow down a little bit. And by the way, I have to say, I had never seen this before. I just ran across a 2011 video of Donald Trump working in one of his hotels and being a bellman and then being a cook. And then it's an amazing thing. It gives you a totally different feel for him as a human being. And I think what he's done is, and David Axelrod, who, as you know, ran the Obama transition, Axelrod came out the other day and said, look, Trump is actually ahead of where we were at this point. All this talk about disarray is nonsense. He is looking methodically, putting together a superb team. He has very tough standards because I think he knows he's going to be in a war with the establishment in Washington every single day of his presidency. And he wants people around him who are committed and dedicated and prepared to stand by his side no matter how hot the heat gets. And I think he's going to put together a good team.
Mr. Speaker, I got about 30 seconds, but Jerry Falwell Jr., as a report this morning, he said that he turned down a cabinet post. But what I found more interesting was that he said that when he got the offer offer from President-elect Trump, he said that he had to commit to serving 4 to 6 years. Is this President-elect already looking ahead that he is going to be a dominant sort of Reagan-esque figure for 8 years?
Oh, I think he should be. I mean, his goal has to be to succeed, to make America great again, to create jobs and to drain the swamp. If he does all that, he's going to get reelected. If he gets reelected, he's going to serve 8 years. And I think, again, it tells you something about how he built the entire Trump empire. He wants people around him that he trusts. He's willing to put a lot of effort into finding the right person. And then he's going to delegate massively. I mean, he's going to have an entire team at work, not just one guy. Unlike the Obama presidency, which centered around this single brilliant figure, Trump is going to have an entire team that he is the leader of and he's the general manager of, but he wants the whole team there, and he wants them there long enough to rely on them.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we hope you and Calista get some time out on the golf course, and we thank her, not just you, for sharing you with us on this Sunday, and have a good rest of the vacation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Speaker.
Great. Good to be with you.
It's such a great point. Indecisiveness to one is patience for another, right? I mean, it's a great point. If you want to take some time to make the right decision, you do that. All right, one of America's top allies now turning on the West. Their ultimatum: give us what we want or we'll flood you with our migrants. Another lose-lose situation on the world stage. We cover that next.
And desperate times call for desperate measures this morning. Nancy Pelosi calling for backup.